If you turn to the back page or the back flap of your flip book, your intro to IM2 flip book, there's a section in there that looks like this. It has a picture of some geometric shapes. And I wanted to just spend a few moments going over some geometric markings with you, because in this course in different places we're going to likely see these markings, and if you were paying attention last year in Integrated Math 1, you should remember these markings. And if you weren't paying attention, this is a big reason why I'm covering it, because you're going to need to understand what these markings mean. So let's go over them together. So again, in your flip book, turn to the very back flaps, just flip it upside down. You'll see this section there. And if you can go ahead and title this section as Geometric Markings. Let's go over the ones that I think are the most important for Integrated Math 2. The first one is, if you remember, there were some times in Integrated Math 1 where you had a shape, this particular shape, let's say that you were told that the top edge of this shape was the exact same length as the bottom edge or the bottom side of this shape. And we were able to mark those to tell us and other people that those were the same length by putting a mark on those. And the mark looked, it's pretty simple, something like this. You could put a single mark there and a single mark there. And that single marking told you that the top edge or the top side is congruent or the same length as the bottom edge. And we also could use double markings, triple markings, four markings, didn't matter, whatever. If you look at a diagram, let's do this for example. Let's say the two sides, left and right side, are congruent. If I put a double mark there and I put a double mark here, that told us that these two sides, the left and the right side, are congruent. Now we got to be careful. If you marked these two sides with a single mark, then you're basically telling all of us that every side of this shape is the same length. And that would be true of a square or a rhombus. So be careful. You look for the markings and match them up with sides of a shape that have the same number of markings, and that tells you that those sides are congruent or the same length. So let's go ahead and write in here to remind ourselves that these markings mean we have congruent sides. Let's write the word congruent in here. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Here are some angles that are formed by two rays, and we also had a way of marking angles as congruent. So let's say you put your protractor on this angle and it's, let's just say for example, 48 degrees, and you put your protractor on this one, it's exactly 48 degrees. That means these two angles are congruent. There's two ways to mark congruence for an angle. One of the ways is just put a little single arc right here and a single arc right here. That tells you these two angles are congruent. You could also do double mark, triple mark, triple mark. Again, if the markings are identical, it means the angles are congruent. There's another way as well. Sometimes books will have it marked this way, or you see homework assignments or videos that'll mark this way. Here's another way to do it. If I put an arc right here in this angle, and let's say I put 2 marks here, kind of like we're marking the sides of this shape as congruent. And then on this angle, I put an arc right here, and I put 2 marks there. Now, instead of having multiple arcs that match up 2 angles as congruent, we just use a single arc, but we put little markers, little line segments on top of that, and if they have the same number, there's 2 here and 2 here, that tells us these angles are congruent. So again, let's go ahead and write the word here so we remember these markings are telling us that these pairs of angles are congruent. Okay, here's 2 lines, and we had a way of marking when lines were parallel. the most common way to tell if two lines are parallel on a paper, we would actually put a little arrow marking on it. So if you saw these two lines right here, and they both had a single arrow on top of the line, that tells you that these two lines are parallel. Now, of course, we could also do double arrow, double arrow. If you had a diagram with multiple lines and some of them are parallel one direction and some of them are parallel maybe in opposite direction, you could mark the two parallel lines this direction with a single arrow, and if the lines are going the opposite direction, you can mark those as double arrows. You can do double, triple, quadruple, just like you would mark side lengths or segment lengths as congruent. So these markings are telling us that these lines are parallel. But I'm going to spell that wrong. Let's try it again. Parallel. Okay, take a look at this angle. Let's remember the mark that tells us that an angle is 90 degrees. And hopefully you'll remember that marking was just a little box. We'll put a little box or a little square. I'm going to make that a little bit nicer. Put a little box here. And that tells you that this angle is a 90-degree angle, or we could also call it a right angle. So I'm going to mark this as right angle. And this will be very important later in this unit because we're going to be talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. These two lines, if they form a right angle, are also perpendicular. I'm going to also call this a 90-degree angle, because we know that a right angle is 90 degrees. So there's a review of some basic geometric markings that you're going to need to know throughout this class.